March 5, 1963, 6:07 p.m. A single-engine Piper Comanche lifts off the runway at Dyersburg Municipal Airport in West Tennessee, into a sky the airport manager had just described, in person, as unfit to fly in. Ceiling, 500 feet. Visibility, 5 miles. Wind, gusty out of the east, 20 miles an hour. On board, 3 of the biggest names on the Grand Ole Opry, and a pilot who has never been rated to fly on instruments in his life. 22 minutes later, near Camden, Tennessee, a farmer steps outside and hears an aircraft engine cutting through low cloud at an angle no engine should ever be flying at. Then he hears it stop. Not sputter. Stop. On the wrist of one of the passengers, a 30-year-old woman whose record label, at that very moment, was still trying to figure out whether to sell her as country or as pop, a watch keeps ticking for exactly as long as it takes metal to hit the ground. Then it stops too, somewhere around 6:20 p.m. Her name was Patsy Cline, and the strangest part of this story isn't that she died that night. It's that half of Nashville had spent the last 6 months waiting for the phone call. Welcome to Country Mysteries. She was born Virginia Patterson Hensley on September 8, 1932, in Winchester, Virginia, to a 16-year-old mother and a 43-year-old father, a 27-year age gap that nobody in the family ever bothered to make sound romantic. Her father, Sam Hensley, was a blacksmith by trade and, according to more than one biographer, an amateur singer and a difficult man to live with. Between his transient work and whatever else was going on at home, the Hensleys moved an estimated 19 times before Virginia turned 15. By 1947, Sam had left for good. Hilda Hensley, 29 years old with 3 kids and a sewing machine, moved the family into a small house on South Kent Street, no electricity, no running water, on the wrong side of the tracks in a town that cared very much about which side of the tracks you were on. Virginia dropped out of high school to help pay the bills, plucking chickens at a poultry plant, scrubbing floors at the Greyhound station, waitressing wherever they'd take her. At 13, she was hospitalized with a throat infection and rheumatic fever serious enough that her heart reportedly stopped for a moment on the table. She recovered and came out the other side with a voice that had gone from a child's soprano to something closer to a foghorn with perfect pitch. "I recovered from that illness with a voice that boomed forth like Kate Smith's," she told an interviewer years later, with the kind of matter-of-fact pride of someone describing a scar. Not everyone in Winchester was impressed. When she was crowned a minor local beauty queen in 1957, already a rising singer, the crowd greeted her with catcalls from the curb for being the girl from Kent Street putting on airs. She muttered exactly one thing back, loud enough for people nearby to hear. "Sons of bitches, I'll show them yet." It's the kind of line a screenwriter would cut for being too on the nose, except she actually said it, in 1957, to real people, about a town that would spend the rest of the century putting up historical markers to her. She started performing locally at 14, church choir, county fairs, a dance hall act modeled on torch singers like Helen Morgan. At 15, dressed for the part, she walked into radio station WINC and asked to audition. The station's disc jockey, Jolton Jim McCoy, later admitted she wasn't very good that first time. She wasn't good, and her inexperience was obvious, he recalled. Eventually, she developed a good style. What he said to her face, on the spot, was more generous. "If you've got nerve enough to stand before that mic and sing over the air live, I've got nerve enough to let you." Given what nerve alone was about to cost her over the next 15 years, in hindsight, it's not the world's most reassuring endorsement. Bill Peer, a local band leader, took her on in 1952 and gave her the stage name that stuck, Patsy, from her middle name Patterson, possibly with a nod to the cowgirl singer Patsy Montana. Under Peer, she toured moose lodges and county fairs across Virginia and Maryland in Western outfits her mother sewed by hand. She also, under pressure from peer, according to biographer Margaret Jones, became entangled in an affair with her own bandleader, the kind of arrangement that did nothing for her reputation back home, and even less for her leverage. In March 1953, she eloped with Gerald Cline, a well-off, older Moose Lodge regular who owned a Buick and, in his own words years later, thought, "It might not have been love at first sight when Patsy saw me, but it was for me." She took his last name and kept it for the rest of her career, which is arguably the only lasting professional benefit that marriage produced. Gerald liked having a wife who sang at parties. He did not like having a wife who was gone most nights on a tour bus. They separated within a few years and divorced in 1957. In 1954, chasing something more permanent than Moose Lodge gigs, she signed her first recording contract with a small label called 4-Star Records. The terms were, by any modern standard, brutal. She could only record songs written by 4-Star's own stable of writers, regardless of quality, and her royalty rate was a fraction of what a bigger label would have offered. Her early singles, A Church, A Courtroom, Then Goodbye, I've Loved and Lost Again, went nowhere. Broke and offered a flat $200 to re-sign for another year, she took it. It bought groceries. It also locked her into the exact arrangement that would keep her chartless for years, even after the world found out what her voice could do. Not much of a choice, all things considered. The break came from a song she didn't even want to sing. In January 1957, 4-Star's producers pushed her toward a moody pop number called Walkin' After Midnight, which she thought was too slow and too far from the country sound she wanted to build a career on. She recorded it anyway, as a compromise, and was booked onto Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts, the American Idol of its day, judged by a literal applause meter. Her mother Hilda, doubling as her official talent scout for the segment, had sewn her a cowgirl outfit for the occasion. The show's producers made her change into a cocktail dress instead, on the theory that a national television audience wanted glamour, not gingham. On January 21, 1957, she sang Walkin' After Midnight under the studio lights, and the applause meter reportedly pinned itself at the top and stayed there. Godfrey, on air, made his own prediction. "You know, I got a hunch this one is," meaning a hit. Decca rush-released the single 3 weeks later. It hit number 2 on the country chart and number 12 on pop, selling roughly 1 million copies. Godfrey, for what it's worth, had also rejected Elvis Presley for this same show 2 years earlier. Talent scouts, it turns out, are not infallible. And then, nothing. For years. Still bound to 4-Star's catalog of writers, still getting handed songs nobody else wanted, Cline spent the back half of the 1950s touring relentlessly and charting nowhere. She divorced Gerald Cline in 1957 and married Charlie Dick, a linotype operator at the Winchester Star, with, in one friend's phrase, a reputation for drinking, picking fights, and being a ladies' man, which, generously, made him a fairly typical match for a woman with her own reputation for being loose by 1950s Winchester standards. In January 1960, she was finally invited to join the Grand Ole Opry as a regular cast member, the first solo female performer to hold that spot. She had a marriage, a growing family, and a permanent seat at country music's most important stage. What she still didn't have, 3 years after Walkin' After Midnight, was a second hit. The industry that finally let her in the front door hadn't yet figured out it was sitting on one of the great voices of the century. That changed on January 30th, 1961, when Decca finally released I Fall to Pieces, a song she'd once again been talked into recording against her own instincts. It climbed the charts slowly, agonizingly slowly, through the spring. And then, on June 14, 1961, while it was still rising, Cline and her brother Sam Jr. were driving home from a shopping trip in Nashville when another car hit them head-on. She went through the windshield. She came out of it with a broken wrist, a dislocated hip, and a laceration across her forehead that missed her eyes by a matter of inches. 2 of the 3 people in the other car died at the hospital. Cline, bleeding and in shock, reportedly insisted the other driver be treated before her. Her doctors did not expect her to survive the night. She did. When she woke from surgery, she told Charlie Dick what had happened while she was under. "Jesus was here, Charlie. He took my hand and told me, 'No, not now. I have other things for you to do.'" Whatever those other things were, apparently they included recording the most talked-about jukebox song in American history 6 weeks later, on crutches. That song was Crazy, written by a then-unknown Willie Nelson, and Cline hated it on first listen. She thought it was slow, dull, and beneath her. Producer Owen Bradley talked her into the studio anyway. Because her ribs were still healing from the crash, she couldn't physically hit the song's high notes without pain. The band recorded the track without her, and she came back a week later to lay down the vocal in a single take. It went to number 2 on the country chart and became her biggest pop crossover yet, later crowned in what has become one of the most repeated claims in country music history, though the exact ranking depends on who's counting, the single most played jukebox recording of all time. Her friendship with a rising singer named Loretta Lynn started around this same accident. Lynn recorded a cover of "I Fall to Pieces" on the radio while Cline was recovering. Cline heard it and sent Charlie out to physically go find and bring back the woman who'd just covered her song. "She taught me a lot about show business," Lynn later said, "like how to go on a stage and how to get off." It is, on reflection, a strange origin story for one of country music's most famous friendships, a near-fatal car wreck functioning as a networking event. The scars never fully went away. For the rest of her life, Cline suffered headaches severe enough that friends recalled her pressing her forehead against cold bathroom tile for relief, and she wore heavy stage makeup and wigs styled with bangs to cover what the windshield had left behind. None of it slowed her down publicly. 1962 brought "She's Got You," a residency spot on Johnny Cash's touring show alongside George Jones and June Carter, appearances at Carnegie Hall and the Hollywood Bowl, a slot on American Bandstand. At home, things were less tidy. Charlie Dick and Cline had, according to biographer Ellis Nasser, a marriage fueled by alcohol, arguments, and jealousy in roughly equal measure with genuine affection. And at least once, after a physical altercation, Cline had her own husband arrested. She was, by every account, the biggest female star in country music. She was also, by the terms of a contract she'd signed nearly a decade earlier as a broke 22-year-old, still not making anything close to what a star of her stature should have been paid. That gap is exactly why, in the fall of 1962, she agreed to a 5-week engagement in Las Vegas. The Vegas run made her the first female country singer to headline a Nevada residency, which sounds like a triumph and felt, by her own account, like anything but. 35 shows in, separated from her husband and 2 young children for weeks at a stretch, she developed stage fright for the first time in her career and started having genuine throat trouble. She came home from Vegas changed, quieter, according to friends, in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. It was around this same period, starting as early as September 1962, that she began telling people close to her, Dottie West, June Carter Cash, Loretta Lynn, that she didn't expect to live much longer. She'd survived 2 serious accidents already, and she'd apparently decided there was a pattern. "I've had 2 bad wrecks," she told Cash and Lynn. "The third one will either be a charm or it'll kill me." She'd made this kind of statement before, more than once, casually enough that friends noted it without necessarily believing it. She had also, back in April 1961, before the car crash, not after, hurriedly written out a will on a piece of Delta Airlines stationery while on a flight, covering who should get what and who should raise her children. It wasn't legally valid, It didn't matter to her that it wasn't legally valid. She wrote it anyway, on an airplane, 2 years before an airplane killed her. In the weeks before her death, friends noticed she'd started giving things away: jewelry, keepsakes, scrapbooks of her own clippings, cash tucked into notes for people she thought might need it. Loretta Lynn later remembered getting a scrapbook from Cline just weeks before the crash and finding a folded check for $75 inside with a note. "I know you have been having a hard time." It reads, in hindsight, less like generosity and more like a woman quietly settling her accounts. On February 4th through 7th, 1963, Cline went into the studio for what would turn out to be her final recording sessions, cutting Sweet Dreams, He Called Me Baby, Faded Love, and, closing it out, a song called I'll Sail My Ship Alone. She invited friends Jan Howard and Dottie West to sit in on the playback, and the whole thing had the air of a party. Champagne afterward, everyone a little giddy. Howard later said she was too in awe to say anything useful. Nobody in that room, as far as anyone has recorded, said out loud what the songs were starting to sound like a farewell to. On March 3, 1963, sick with the flu, Cline still performed a benefit concert in Kansas City, Kansas, for the family of a local disc jockey killed in a car accident. 3 separate shows in one day, in 3 different dresses, closing the night with I'll Sail My Ship Alone to a standing room crowd. Bad weather grounded the group's return flight for a full extra day. When Dottie West, who was also in Kansas City and driving home, offered Cline a lift by car instead of flying, Cline turned her down flat. "Don't worry about me, Hoss," she reportedly told West. "When it's my time to go, it's my time." It's a hard line to read back, knowing what came next, and an even harder one to read as anything other than exactly what it sounds like. On the afternoon of March 5th, the group finally departed Fairfax Municipal Airport in Kansas City aboard a Piper Comanche piloted by Cline's own manager, Randy Hughes, a private pilot with roughly 160 total flying hours and no instrument rating. On board with Cline and Hughes were fellow Opry stars Cowboy Copas and Hawkshaw Hawkins, who had taken another performer's seat at the last minute. They stopped to refuel at Dyersburg, Tennessee, where the airfield manager checked the weather, told Hughes conditions were marginal at best, and suggested the group simply stay the night. According to the Nassour biography, Hughes's answer was, "I've already come this far. We'll be there before you know it." They took off at 6:07 p.m. 22 minutes later, a witness near Camden watched the aircraft descend out of low cloud at what investigators later calculated was a 45-degree angle, going roughly 175 miles an hour, and heard it hit the ground. Nobody on board survived the impact. The wreckage wasn't found until 6:10 the next morning. Roger Miller, a friend of Cline's who joined the overnight search, later described running through the woods, screaming their names into the dark, hoping for an answer that was never going to come. The official federal investigation would eventually put the cause in 9 dry words: a non-instrument-rated pilot attempting visual flight in weather that required instruments. Everything else, the warning at Dyersburg, the offered car ride, the will written on airline stationery 2 years earlier, was just the part that happened before the official report started. Patsy Cline was buried in her hometown of Winchester, Virginia, at Shenandoah Memorial Park, in a funeral that drew national news coverage and crowds of fans far larger than the small town was used to hosting. Her grave marker reads simply, "Death cannot kill what never dies. Love." Friends Loretta Lynn and Jan Howard later helped fund a memorial bell tower at the cemetery, which, by design, rings out hymns every evening at 6 p.m., roughly the hour investigators believe her watch stopped. It's the kind of detail that would be dismissed as too sentimental in a screenplay. And it's real. And someone in Winchester chose it on purpose. The posthumous singles kept climbing the charts as if she'd never left. Sweet Dreams, Faded Love, and Leavin' on Your Mind all charted in the following months, selling to an industry that, while she was alive, had never quite paid her what she was worth. In 1973, a full decade after her death, Patsy Cline became the first solo female performer ever inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, an honor that, notably, nobody had rushed to hand her while she could have shown up to accept it in person. In 1995, she received a posthumous Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, and both I Fall to Pieces and Crazy were later added to the Grammy Hall of Fame. Crazy is still, by most tallies, among the most played jukebox recordings of all time, the song she originally didn't want to record, from an artist she'd never met, cut in a single take while her ribs were still healing from a car crash. Every major female country vocalist who came after her, Loretta Lynn, Dolly Parton, Linda Ronstadt, Katie Lang, Winona Judd, Trisha Yearwood, has at some point publicly named her as the standard. In 1957, a crowd in her own hometown had booed her for putting on airs. By the time the world caught up to what they'd been booing, she'd been dead for 10 years. So, a woman who wrote her own will on a plane ticket, gave her jewelry away like she was clearing out a closet, and turned down a car ride home the week before the exact kind of transportation she'd chosen instead, killed her. Make of that what you will. I go back and forth on it myself, and I'm the one who just spent 20 minutes reading you the timeline. Tell me in the comments, do you think Patsy Cline actually knew? Or is this the kind of thing everyone's friends remember once it's already happened? I'd genuinely like to hear where you land on it. If this is the first one of these you've watched, hit like and subscribe if you want more of this. Next time, we're staying in Nashville for a story about two of the biggest names in the genre's history, a partnership that made both of their careers, and a falling out messy enough that it ended up in front of a judge. Dolly Parton and Porter Wagoner. I'm Roman. See you next time.